He was a high-ranking official in the U.S. Information Agency in Washington, D.C. This was up until June of 1990. But then for the next 8 years, Gerald L. Campbell lived on the streets of D.C. with the homeless, photographing them, talking to them. And today he's going to be talking to us as he's come to Austin to be the senior advisor of the Commissioner of Health in the state of Texas. Stay with us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, on behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, bidding you welcome to this edition of the show. And today we're beginning the first of two in a series on Beyond Homelessness. The issue of homelessness having been discussed and debated so often over the last decades and continues to be in our time. And we are privileged to have someone who approached this personally as he spent 8 years on the streets of Washington, D.C., living with and getting to know and photographing homeless persons. This is Gerald L. Campbell, who currently is the senior advisor to the Commissioner of the state of Texas. And Jerry, it's just great to have you here.
It's good to be here, Rich.
And I think just to hear your story, that you were working in the U.S. Information Agency and then left that to go and spend this time with people who were homeless. Why did you do it?
Well, I did it probably for reasons I don't understand and for some reasons that I do. But the catalyst for doing this really came out of my work in national security. In my position, I had occasion to talk with a lot of people from around the world, and we brought them over through various programs in the agency to the United States for a visit, usually for about 36 days. And what struck me about so many of them is that they wanted to go out and to see the homeless. And I thought that was quite unusual because they were from foreign countries. They had never been here before, and they still wanted to see the homeless. And this struck me as something, as I began to think about it, that should take more seriously than before, because the thing about the homeless, although they were concerned about other problems like drugs and crime and social unrest in the United States, this was during the 80s, and if you recall, there was unrest in Los Angeles and Miami and Detroit and elsewhere. But the thing about the homeless was that it contradicted so much about what they had come to understand about America.
Okay, so it's striking that the image that they have of this country was had that so much as a part of it, that that's what they wanted to see. And then that led you, in turn, to want to see more of it close up, it sounds like.
Well, you see, what I began to realize is that, and USIA is a communications agency.
Right.
What I began to realize was that through television, through images, we were projecting a different perspective of what this country is. We were showing them the day-to-day life in this country, and homelessness was a part of that. But this was really quite different than what people around the world had understood America to be, as a land of promise and hope.
As you say, contradictory to that.
And so it began to undermine, I could see this in the long term, that it would begin to undermine our national security in two basic ways, that it would call into question the notion of individual freedom as maybe the promise for new emerging countries that were freed from communist tyranny. And secondly, it would undermine our moral authority in the critical area of human rights. And so what I saw was a convergence of our domestic issues and our national security issues. And that if we wanted to maintain the moral cohesion around the world based on the notion of freedom, we had to begin to address some of these social issues.
All right. And when you then spent 8 years with homeless persons, you began to photograph them. I'd like to just take an initial look at one of these pictures that you have and have you tell us about who this is and what that means.
Well, his name is Ben. And what these photographs and the whole series that we'll see talk about is that the homeless I see as a metaphor for the alienation of the individual from the moral and spiritual bonds of community. Mm-hmm. And what you see here is two things. At first, the thing that strikes you most is the alienation, the sense of aloneness, the sense of isolation, the sense of a wound, kind of an existential wound. But if you look deeper into this image, you'll also see something, and this is where the power of the image is. The power of the image is the fact that this individual is crying out for love. Mm. And it strikes something within you. You have this kind of relationship. And this, in a way, points to two fundamental principles at the very core of the human spirit as I see it. And that's the dialectical principles of love and alienation.
Okay. Tell us about how you met Ben, what your relationship with him was like.
Well, he was basically a person that I met in one of the parks in Washington. And I was walking through the park, and he was sitting there, and I walked to him. We started talking. And we talked for about a half hour, just about things and about him. And I told him something about myself and what I was trying to do with my work on the street. And then I met him a few other times, and then I wouldn't see him again, and then I would see him again. And we became close in the sense, not that we palled around a lot, but in the sense that there was a kind of a chord that struck at a deeper level. And I can recall after about 8 years, just before I came here, I was walking through the street, and I saw him, and he came up to me, and he grabbed me, and he put his arms around me. He says, I just want to thank you for helping me so much. Mm. And I says, what do you mean? He says, no. He says, you've really helped me. He says, things are really going well in my life. And I thought for a second, and I thought, this is really strange, because I really haven't been around you that much, and I began to think about, well, what is it that makes a difference in a person's life? Is it the things we give them, or is it if we give of ourselves? And I think it was that deeper thing that is what was instrumental in his life, and that's what he was referring to.
That had the effect, a long-term effect. I mean,
long-term effect,
over a period of years. Let's see another one.
This is Ben again. And what you have is that, in a way, there's an image here. It's about suffering, but it's also about something more than that. It's about some kind of redemptive quality that love can bring to a person's life. Mm-hmm. I see a parallel here between this image and Christ as portrayed by Ruwalt. I don't know if you're familiar with Ruwalt.
Right, sure. Uh-huh.
But there's a very distinct. I have been a fan, not a fan, but I own a couple of Ruwalts.
Oh, really?
And they have since I was in graduate school back in 1965.
Wow. Uh-huh.
And those images have really, in a way, shaped my vision of how I see a human being.
Now, Ben was when he came to see you. Had his circumstances changed? Was he still?
Sure. No, he wasn't, and he was married. And he had a child.
Ah, okay. So you really saw a change in terms of his.
Right.
And how did he say he helped you, or that you helped him?
Well, when I pointed out that we really hadn't been around each other that much, he was sort of surprised as to why I said that.
Yeah.
But you see, today when we talk about intervention, we talk about really encircling a person with all kinds of services and all kinds of attention. But it may be that in order to really change a person's life, you have to go deeper. You have to go deeper into them.
Did he see the pictures that you took of him?
Right.
And you told me before the show that these photos were on display at some place.
Well, I used to take them after I would get enough to show. I would take them out into the parks, and I would allow those who were in the image, like Ben and others, I would allow them to come and look at them. And the thing that sort of struck me more than anything else is what they said about him. They would say, that's the way it is. Mm. referring to homelessness. They knew that I was trying to explore the deeper dynamics of homelessness as it existed in the concrete lives.
So they
of
say you
individuals.
caught that condition.
And they say I caught that.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see another one. And who is this?
This is, well, I won't mention his name, but he's a person that I got to know, and I've known for about 10 years now. And at one point in his life, he was a heroin addict and ran the streets. But in this image, you see, once again, you see the dialectic of love and alienation. On the one side, you see the dark with the eye. That's the brutalization, that's the dark side, that's the alienation. And yet on the other side, if you can just sort of visualize half of the image, you see this warmness, this reaching out, this crying out for love. And I think that that's what people are looking for more in their lives than anything else, is the love that makes them to be complete, because without others we can't be complete.
You recall how this particular individual became homeless?
No, I don't. No.
Did you see a pattern in the people that you worked with? What were the conditions that led them to be on the streets?
Well, it's a strange thing, because there's a lot of people out there. Of course, they don't have houses. Although a lot of people can go to a place, they can go back with their family if they want to. There's a lot of drugs out there. There's a lot of joblessness, although a lot of homeless people work part-time and they still stay on the street. But what in talking with them, what I began to see was that there was a kind of disconnectedness at the most basic level, and they felt like they didn't belong. And I began to realize that more than anything else, it was this unmet need to belong that in a way drove them, because the need was there whether they were treated right or not.
I see.
And so if they didn't find a way to belong in their family or in their schools or elsewhere, they would gravitate towards where they felt comfortable, where they felt like they belonged. And it could be the street.
And did you find a sense of community that had developed among folks there?
There's definitely a sense of community out there. Yeah.
And did they include you in?
They did, and as a matter of fact, I'm still alive, and I think that's testimony to the fact that, that I was accepted at some level.
All right. Just to survive was a sign of acceptance.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to take a break here, but look forward to coming back and seeing more of your images and sharing more of your insights. Stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue today. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where today we are in conversation with Gerald L. Campbell, currently the Senior Advisor to the Commissioner of Health for the state of Texas. At one time, up until 1990, he was a Senior Advisor to persons in the U.S. Information Agency. But then between 1990 and 1998, he lived for 8 years on the streets of D.C., to be close to and to get to know homeless persons. Beyond homelessness is our topic, and we come back to it, Jerry. In our first half, talking a little bit about these folks that you got to know, and I guess I have to say that people are going to want to know, well then, you said you weren't sure why you decided to do this. But once you did it, once you got into it, if you were there for 8 years, it must have been confirmed that you were doing what you needed to do.
Right, that's true. I wasn't out there 8 years just to take photographs, but I began to see something important that others were missing. I began to realize that we were only approaching part of this problem, that we were dealing with more the symptoms of what these people had to contend with on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. But if we are to really get to the root of the problem and begin to make a difference, we have to understand at a deeper level what works through these individuals' lives. And that's what I was trying to do. And not only that, but I had to go out and begin to articulate this in such a way that I could explain it to others.
I see. Is that where the pictures came in?
That's where the pictures, this is a language. The pictures are a language of communication. And they say things that the written word or the spoken word can't really say.
In the first half we were looking at some of those, but we've got some more to look at. Let's begin to do that. Who is this?
Well, this is an image behind the Martin Luther King Library in Washington, D.C. And the reason why I included this image, because in a way it sort of portrays something that is happening in America. If you notice in the image, you'll see that there are utilitarian relationships there among the people, between the people and certain objects. The woman in the front has just come from the drugstore and she's got some stuff in her bag. But what is missing in these images is the relationships among people. There's a sense of alienation. And if you begin to look at the relationships that exist in the United States, that personal relationships are fractured. You go to the suburbs and you have every third acre, you have a house that's separated from another house, and you have families that don't know each other. Too many people are abandoned when they get old. There's child abuse. So there's a fracturing of relationships in America. And I think in a way this image is a kind of a portrait of America to at least show that dimension. There's more to America than this, but this is an aspect of it.
Right, right. And I was interested in a quote that you have given me here that from a homeless person, March of 1991. Even if I were to have a house and a job, my situation would not be much different. The problem is that in society I am all alone, isolated from everything and everyone. Until that changes, any effort to get me straight will fail. At least here on the street I have friends, and right now that matters more to me than anything else.
So there's two dimensions to this problem. There's the problem of the material conditions of the individual, the economic conditions, the social conditions of the individual. But they're also speaking to something deeper, and that is this question of relationships, the quality of relationships that a person must have in their life to thrive. I call it love, and that's what most people in the street call it. And so what she's saying is that if I have a house and a job, who wants to be in an empty house? There's a little adage, a house is made of bricks and stone, a home is made of love alone. And I think that's what they're referring to. That if you live in an environment where you don't feel wanted, then you don't feel like you should be there. And so you go until you do find that.
All right. Let's look at still another image.
This is Margie. She died about 6 months after this picture was taken. But if you look at the image carefully, you find that there's a hat. This is in front of the homeless shelter, CCNV, in Washington, D.C., which I believe is the largest homeless shelter in the country. It's 2 blocks from Georgetown University Law School. She's got a dress which is perfectly pressed. She's got jewelry on. She's got a hat. She's leaning on this parking meter, and it says time expired, and then the sign just below the parking meter says emergency. But the point is that the situation cannot be truly understood. Homelessness cannot be truly understood until you look at her face, and it's in that face. The question is, what is going to make that face smile? what is going to make that face open and radiate life? And that is a relationship, a sense of love, and only another person can give that. And so what I'm saying is that alienation is really the root cause of homelessness. And it's manifested in all types of material ways, but that's where you have to go.
Well, you know, I've heard, and I'm sure you have oftentimes said, that how many people in our society are one paycheck away from homelessness. Now, that's an economic factor.
That's true.
But I would gather from what you said earlier, the difference between a house and a home, you might say they're one paycheck away from houselessness. If they have support, if they have community, if they have commitment to each other, it's altogether than if it's maybe having the paycheck and feeling disconnected.
Right. I mean, you know, when you go back to the Depression, you find a lot of people that were in, you know, really fell through the cracks. And yet it was a time when people really helped each other. And this is written, you know, John Steinbeck's novels, you find that. But at the same time, today, we have the homeless are looked upon in a different way. I remember when I was a young kid, my grandfather worked for the Northern Pacific Railroad in the state of Washington. And he lived in a section house right next to the tracks, and there were a lot of what we called then hobos.
Right.
And we looked upon them with a sense of honor, and they were free-spirited people. We didn't look down upon them for their condition, for their economic or social condition. We, in a way, sort of secretly admired them. But the homeless today are not looked upon in that way. There's something we seem to have placed more of a premium on the economic and the social today in judging people than we did when I was a kid, when my grandfather had hobos all around.
Have you ever heard of the music of Tom Paxton?
Oh, yes.
Rambling boy, to Tulsa town we chanced to stray. We thought we'd find some work one day. The boss said he had room for one, and I said I'd rather bum. I mean, to romanticize at least the condition of the hobos in those days, but it's in contrast certainly to attitudes today.
Right.
Let's see what we've got next in terms of what's going on today.
Well, this is a former lawyer, and his name was Cincinnati. He also died. But he worked for HEW at the time for 29 years.
Wow.
And he ended up on the street. And I asked him one time, I said, "Why are you here?" And he says, very simply, "Too many things." And what he meant was that he wasn't really respected. He wasn't really respected in his family. He wasn't really respected by members of his family, by his brothers and whatnot. And so he went out on the street. And then at first he was living in the shelter, but there was too many things going on there. And so he decided just to live on the street. And that's his home right there. And yet if you look at the image, there's a certain transcendence in that human form. And if you look at the stuff around the image, you'll see different icons of our society. There's Evian, there's Magruder's grocery store, which is an upscale grocery store in Washington, D.C. There's certain symbolism there which represent our society, and yet it's all trash. But even though he's homeless, there's a kind of transcendence in that image. And I think that what I'm trying to do is to point out the dignity of that person regardless of the social and economic conditions.
Well, apart from just seeing him in that position, you got to know him.
Oh, yes.
You found a sense of dignity and transcendence in knowing him.
I remember one time I gave him a tape and a tape player. And on there, because he knew everything about jazz. I never knew anybody that knew so much about jazz. He knew all the places in Washington going back 40, 50 years. And I gave him a tape of Art Tatum's music, and he listened to it. And then I says, "I'll bring you some more tapes." And he gave it back to me, and he says, "No." He says, "Now you take that and give it to your grandchildren." He says, "It would cause me too many problems out here."
Oh, okay. So he knew what it took to survive.
Right. Yeah.
We may have time for one more here. Let's see what this is.
This is Copper Slim. That's the name he went by. He used to be a merchant marine, and the same kind of thing. He felt the same type of dynamic of being mistreated and so on in his life. And this picture was taken about 3 weeks after his girlfriend died. She was a heroin addict, and she took heroin, but she got some bad stuff, and it turned out to be Clorox instead of heroin.
Wow.
But you see there, you see him, you see that sense of alienation, that aloneness. He eventually died on the street. If you notice his feet, they're swollen, so he died of liver failure. But it's...
So what is there about this picture that brings out what you have perceived as being true?
It's once again, it's the sense of that wound. It's the sense of not having been loved, the sense of being let down by others. And yet, if you look at that image, I mean, you can't dislike him. You know, there's this crying out for love, which strikes a resonance within ourselves. And if we get to know people for who they are, we'll see something more than what we see.
You know, today we're just beginning to obviously scratch the surface of what it is that you have to say and to show us. And I'm delighted that next week we're going to be able to come back and continue the conversation and begin to speak in terms of what your perceptions are of what can be done to make a difference. And right now you're working for a government agency again.
That's right.
Policy, policy, programs, and all of this. But you're talking about really kind of spiritual of alienation and community. And I'm looking forward. I wish we could start it today, but you're feeling that there could be a difference, even the way public programs are done.
Right.
Would that be a fair summary of what we can expect?
Not just programs, but beginning to get people to understand at a deeper level what role relationships play in alleviating some of these social conditions we have in this country. So it's a matter of leadership and language.
And as senior advisor to the Commissioner of Health for the state of Texas, you're feeling like what you can advise in regard to will touch on those personal relationships.
Very good.
And Jerry Campbell, you're an interesting guy. And
Thank you, Rich.
We're really going to look forward to continuing to hear about what you've done and where you're going and where you hope our society is going as we go into the 21st century.
Great.
We hope you folks are going to be coming back next week and joining us again on Austin Faith Dialogue, our topic, Beyond Homelessness. Good day.